So, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever this is coming out to you just now. I'm Dr. Christopher Windmill, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Staffordshire in Design and Programming, and I teach on the games programming courses in the technology cluster.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jennifer Challenor, and I'm a lecturer of games art here at the University of Staffordshire.
And welcome to Developer Mode. So, today's going to be slightly different to most sessions, where most of these developer modes are staff members talking about their own specializations and similar. I've taken a very sort of different route into games, and today we're going to have a quick discussion through that, looking at sort of my path into this and sort of looking at how games is not just for people who immediately go, I want to be a games developer, I want to be a games artist, but it's a field that opens up to everybody and opens up many, many fields of opportunity to people.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Let's go back to the beginning to get started with. So, what did you initially specialise in at the start of your career?
So my undergraduate degree was in electronics and computer science, so very much focused on sort of the hardware software boundary and the interaction between that. So I did placements and things like developing software for radars, and then my PhD was originally in advanced video streaming codecs.
Wow.
So making videos go over slow internet connections. Thankfully, the internet has gotten faster and better. So that was where that started. And then unfortunately, the company I was doing it with went under, and I moved in sort of future internet routing architectures as it'd been something I'd been looking at in terms of how we actually manage systems and how we move data around.
So, sort of systems and technology, that's always been your passion.
Yeah, it's always been one of those interesting questions. So one of the things that really got me as a kid was Tommy Flowers and Colossus.
Okay.
It always was always that question of, how does somebody build Colossus? You know, because the story basically that you hear is Tommy Flowers, sort of a network engineer, built Colossus, and it just appeared sort of magically. And that's always really confusing as a kid because you're like, but how? I'm sure that applies nowadays. When you think about large scale systems, whether that's something like Amazon, whether it's something like Facebook, or Grand Theft Auto 6, Red Dead Redemption, all these games are huge, and you go, how? How do you build that? So I started off with that of, how do you build it? And, very much is that hardware-software interaction. And from a games perspective, very much the how do people interact with systems? Because it's not just, can we build something that works? It's, can we build something that works and people can use? So that's where I came into this as, how do we build cool stuff that does things for people? And that's where electronics and computer science came in was, how do we build PCs? How do we code them? How do we make these work from the ground through to things? And, it always fascinates me in games as well. I remember building one of our first university projects, ended up accidentally building Tetris.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Well, it is. Tetris is one of those beautiful games where, you look at it and you go, it's a grid of boxes that fall down the screen. And then you realize there's so much more to it. So things like how you generate your pieces. It's not simply, I have a list, I just randomly pick one. There's lots of different algorithms that approach this. So things like bags. So a lot of the Tetris games do things like they actually put a set of each piece into a bag, and then you're always guaranteed to pick out one of each piece before it moves to the next set.
Huh, I did not know that. I really thought it was just always random.
No, a lot of them. So you get double bags, single bags, but there's always an algorithm to how you generate pieces. And again, that's one of those cool things. And then you look at the blocks fall down, and they don't just move down and lock. You have playtime when you can move the block sideways. So there's a lot of advanced techniques about when a block locks into place and how you can move it. And again, that sort of the user interaction with the games is, it's amazing when you think, someone actually sat there, or possibly they didn't, possibly it was an accident, and they went, that's really cool. But someone sat down and went, actually, being able to control this means people have more fun, people enjoy it more. So yeah, that was my sort of early background was, the technology that led into this.
Yeah, of course. So, was there ever any interest in going into games before you officially made the move?
Yeah, so when I finished university, that would be in 2007, make me feel old. The PlayStation 3 had just come out, and things like Resistance Fall of Man. So I applied to things like Guerrilla Games and similar.
Okay.
I did code tests for them, and it was really interesting. And sort of, I did get through various stages of things, but it's when you look at it and you go, I still want to do, cool and interesting things with cool and interesting things. And at the time, it was like, well, I went and did an engineering doctorate, because I thought, I want to know more. I don't want to just build things. I want to sort of, find out more about technological subjects, more about where this goes. So I did my doctorate, and at the end of that, I moved to Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University as sort of a lecturer in sort of software engineering and various other things. And one of the things I found was that there isn't, or games is a subject that really brings everyone together. Not only is it a humanistic thing, it's about how people play games, how people interact with games, but it also brings together all the technology aspects that I loved. So, you can't just build Microsoft Word, and if it takes 5 seconds to work, it takes 5 seconds. Nobody complains. If you press a button and Mario doesn't jump for 5 seconds, everyone looks at you and goes, something's wrong here. So it brings in that aspect of real-time systems, real-time controls, real-time interaction in a way that's not predictable, because you never know what a user's going to do. So it's not only advanced programming skills, it's also a really artistic side of it, because you can't just go and building a piece of technology that does stuff. So a nuclear reactor, again, got to run in real time. Generally, the users are going to be happy with the control interface, and if they're not, they're paid to be there, so they'll live with it. Whereas with games, people will put them down if they're not fun and enjoyable, if the control system doesn't work for them. And again, the evolution of that across time is beautiful. When you see, well, have you ever played GoldenEye on the N64?
I have, yes.
Did you enjoy the control system?
As a child, I did, but I also didn't know any better.
Yeah. So again, one of the beautiful aspects about games is over time we've developed systems for interacting with humans. We now know what to expect, how people will work. And when you go back and play retro games, you see that learning curve, and very much in real time, the evolution of your PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 and similar, you see in real time developers gaining knowledge and experience. They learn to work with people, they learn what people want, and they open up markets to huge numbers of people, that we wouldn't necessarily have thought immediately. When I was a kid, you think, who is the market for games? And it was relatively small, whereas now the market is everybody. And that's wonderful.
Yeah, games have definitely become far more accessible than ever. I think we are seeing a really big change in marketplaces and approaches from consumer attitudes in that regard. God rest her soul, my grandmother used to spend a disproportionate amount of time playing a bunch of games on Facebook. She was really into Farmville when that was like a big deal. And, even though, some people like to draw lines and decide what they think is a hardcore game or what they think is a serious game, believe me, my grandmother's relationship with Farmville was not casual. It was definitely a hardcore game for her.
Yeah, and that I think is part of the beauty of what makes games a really interesting subject to study and one to really get involved in, is it doesn't just cross age barriers, it crosses cultural barriers, it crosses everything. So, probably sort of one of my core memories is Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. So, sort of the first JRPG that really made it big over here in the West, and it was great. When you look back, the characters, they're slightly blocky and stuff, and there were limitations to what we could do. But it was an amazing story that, really sort of, well, I don't know if it spoke to me, but, it sat there, I think, 24 hours when it first came out, and I played it, I don't think I've ever played a game that long since, And that sort of thing where we've opened up games, and what we've realised is that they're not just for entertainment. So some of the research projects I've been involved in include things like using it for mental health or, considering rehabilitation. So it's a game with a purpose, a serious game. And that fits more and more into people's lives, which is something wonderful to see. That it's not just, 18 to 35-year-olds, playing games. The number of older gamers that, love Wii tennis, Wii bowling.
Yes. Can't beat the Wii Sports games. You just can't.
I don't know. I think a number of TV manufacturers might disagree with you.
I will say this on behalf of the consumers. TV manufacturers, skill issue.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the other things as well that I've really seen a lot with my own research is that games technology is built with the intention that this will be used for making games. And then we are starting to see more of a bleed over where games technology is being used for other purposes. Now, I remember reading an article, this was a while ago now, and this is one of those cases where I don't know if this was a serious use case or whether this was someone's research experiment. But I read this article about how in a operating theatre, they had installed a Kinect because there was this serious barrier between being able to take tests and get images and then having to leave the operating theatre, sort of clean up, scrub out, go to the computer, look at the images that had been generated, and then scrub back in and go back into the operating theatre and keep the sterile environment to actually then follow up on it. So they'd use this Kinect to basically connect everything to a computer screen. So they could basically take some samples and they can get some images, send them over to the lab, get them processed, and then they could literally interact with them and swipe through them and check them without ever leaving the operating theatre, which broke that barrier down, which was absolutely fascinating to me at the time when I read it, I think this was about 2013, so a bit of a while back now. Again, I don't know if that was ever used seriously or if that was a research project that was testing viability of it. But once again, systems and technology being used in ways that we didn't necessarily expect, but have since been useful to change lives in some cases.
Yeah, again, I think that's a really wonderful point you're making is, the Kinect, most of us of a certain age probably remember it as, it was an interesting toy for a small while. Still one of my major sporting injuries. Never play Kinect sports with an Artex ceiling.
Oh dear.
That hurt.
Oh dear.
But it was a depth camera that you could interact with and, you could swipe, you could talk, and your friends could say Xbox shut down, and so many Xboxes shut down. But it was the fact that we had a piece of technology that was cheap and accessible. And that's one of the things that games drives really well. So when we look at it as the Kinect, is it the most wonderful piece of technology ever? Probably not. Did it lead to a huge amount of research and interest in user interaction and similar? Yes. The Wii balance board is still being used by researchers for a lot of things because it's a simple pressure sensor that you can get data out of easily over Bluetooth. Wiimotes are still being used. Again, they're cheap and accessible in a way that allows research to move from, only done by huge universities or companies to something you can literally afford to do on a shoestring budget, which is wonderful. And when we see technologies like that coming in, so VR headsets are something that I, love and played around with too much, but the very fact that we can give someone an immersive environment, we can now start to do things like exposure therapy and similar in a way that is cheap and effective. So we can start to use these tools to do things like triage medical problems or, provide support. We've got cameras that track the user's movement. We can determine if they're actually following exercises correctly rather than having, someone have to be in the room watching you. Or again, having a camera watching you, which makes a lot of people self-conscious. So we've seen the drive from that, from early headsets that were, thousands of pounds for something that's, okay, to devices that are a couple of £100, but offer so much interaction and capability it almost becomes a disposable tool that we can actually open up to everyone. We can give them out on the NHS or similar as tools for healthcare.
Very good point. So coming from that sort of more traditional technology background and moving into games, are there any peripherals or any sort of game toys in general that you've really enjoyed getting to work with the most, whether that's like VR, whether that's the balance boards or motion controls?
Oh, that's a hard one. There are so many interesting toys in games fields. I think probably the most interesting thing is actually virtual reality, because we've got this concept called presence, how much people feel like they're actually inside the environment. And it is actually a hugely beneficial thing that you would never think of. So we once did a game jam where we had somebody playing for about an hour on a game, and they got used to teleporting around. And at the end of it, he came out of it and he was doing this. And, it's the point when it dawns on you that, I said to him, legs. And he was like, legs. That's how you move.
Oh.
He had literally, he'd been teleporting around for an hour, and he adapted to it. And again, I've played lots of games like Thrill of the Fight, where, you get some people who engage in it. That one's a boxing game, and you get sort of, I am going to punch you. Yay. And we had one guy doing it, and every time the boxer sort of punished him, he actually physically reacted to it. He was that involved in the game that he was actually, I don't know if he was feeling it, but he was reacting as if he was actually being punched. And, that was amazing to see, that piece of technology that, 5 years before that, this would have been sort of 2 or 3 years ago. So, early Oculus sort of era, you probably wouldn't have seen that. But now it was reaching the point where he was engaged, and people were losing that connection between sort of the real world and the virtual world. And thus they were actually engaging with it in a way that is meaningful. And again, I think that could be a wonderful thing for, one of the things that keeps coming up on my YouTube feed is sort of the pyramids of Giza.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But, I'm 6'4". I'm not the smallest guy in the world. Going inside the Great Pyramid is probably going to be very claustrophobic. But I would love to see the insides. I'd love to go in and see, proper LiDAR scans of the area, be able to look around and actually go, see what it would be like to be there. And I could do that, We could open up school kids so they can actually go places and see things and interact with them. And we don't have to worry about, health and safety. We're not going to lose any children down, I don't know why we'd have, manholes or something, but Indiana Jones has taught me a lot about the fact that when we go to ancient tombs, there's always like a big rock that rolls down.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. So, we don't lose any children to falling rocks or similar. It's a nice, wonderful, safe environment. And it opens up so many opportunities to kids. It opens up so many opportunities for everyone. There are places we can't go because it'd have a huge ecological impact. There are places we can't go because, it would destroy the area. So the terracotta armies and similar, when they were taken out, dug up, they were originally actually fully painted. And, when we dug them up, the paint disappeared, oxidized. I'm not a chemist, so we'll use disappeared magically.
Yep, that's a technical term.
Yep. And so now when you see them, they look terracotta, but you could actually go and see what things looked like. And I've seen several of the English heritage things where they've got, piece of plastic that you can look through and you can see what the building would have looked like at the time. And, the French cathedral that burned down.
The Notre Dame.
Notre Dame, yeah. So there's a full 3D walk-around environment in a warehouse-scale environment where you can actually go around Notre Dame. So you can go down all the passages you wouldn't normally see. You can go and interact. You can see history, and it can simply be a tool to go and see Notre Dame, or it can be a tool to teach history. And again, games is opening this up because that's not just computing, that's not just development. It's a game. It's in virtual reality. It involves art. There's a designer involved. There's a human interaction specialist making sure it's good. Does this actually work for people? And that's beautiful. Games brings everyone together, from your really, really hardcore engine programmers, people who are interested in, how memory and bytes move around in hardware, sort of where I started, all the way through to, yourself, I've seen your art, it's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
My art, not so much. But it brings together all those disciplines and people you wouldn't normally sort of meet in the field to build something that works for people, for any environment.
Okay, yeah. So there is a question I'm going to ask with you being, a systems and technology expert. If I were to be able to write you a blank check and I were to say, right, you can pick any systems problem, you can pick any technology problem, you can think of any cool thing that you might like to see built in games and, that we can't currently do, what would you build?
That's a really hard question. I think the first one that obviously comes to mind is a Scottish problem. I love the idea of being able to interact with a computer properly. So way too many episodes of Star Trek and similar. And, again, accents and all that are difficult to pick up on. So I would love to see us actually be able to talk to computers, because there's so much we do that it's easier to describe what you're thinking rather than sort of typing or putting it out. The way humans often, so goes back to sort of the rubber duck debugging problem. So for those of you who don't know, rubber duck debugging is when we've got a problem and we have a little rubber duck or any object. You can pick a brick wall if you really want, but rubber ducks tend to be cuter. So you talk to the problem through to the duck, and as you talk through it, it becomes obvious what the problem was, and thus the rubber duck helps you solve the problem. And there are so many times I'd like to be able to talk to a computer and sort of, I'm typing, I'm thinking at the same time, I'm verbalizing stuff. I would love something in the background that's actually doing that. So again, I really like RTS games. And the number of times, what I really want to be able to do is I'm focused over here, doing a base defense, whatever, building something cool, and something's happening over there. And what I really want to be able to do is, oi, you, go over there, go fix the problem. So, but being Scottish, the accent, very difficult to pick up.
Yeah, that must be a real pain in the butt.
It can be. It's one of those things where, again, this is a broader problem, obviously, than just Scottish people, but Scottish people have had this joke running for a long time of, sort of picking up accents and similar. But it applies to a lot of things. Or, again, games reaching out beyond games. If we've got somebody that's talking, can we actually understand what they're doing? So one of the research projects I was looking at doing was around what people say when they're training. So one of the problems we had was around sort of radiology, and sort of lovely field. You've got a student managing a large, complex piece of equipment, and you unfortunately also have a patient in the room.
Oh, right, okay.
So you're training with this, you're trying to make sure you're doing your job right. Are you necessarily thinking about what's coming out your mouth? Possibly not. So I've been through treatment where, the nurse and all that, they've done a lot of this, nice, gentle, kind. And then the doctor came in, they obviously hadn't spent as much time doing it. So they were busy reassuring me, as they sort of, pushed my head places and things, or they focused on, the technology and ignored me. So again, that kind of game-driven audio processing, I think, would be wonderful for not only games. I'd love to be able to go, oi, send, units 5 and 6 over there to deal with that. I want to finish, because I can multitask, I can move this and this, but I can multitask by talking at the same time. And I think it would have great capabilities into the real world as well.
Absolutely. I mean, goodness knows how many episodes of Star Trek has, Geordi or, O'Brien, trying to fix something and they're telling the computer to do stuff as they're doing it. And that's like part of that process. I can definitely see that being helpful. What do you think are the main technological challenges that are currently getting in the way of that type of thing?
I think part of the problem large parts of that one are probably sort of the fact that we all speak differently. We all speak differently when we're tired, when we're, thinking straight. We talk very, very quickly in our native languages when we're comfortable with things. So again, if you're learning a language, you often learn, can't remember French back from high school. Oh, can't even remember any French now. That's terrible.
Oh no.
But yeah, you speak quite slowly. You interact slowly, whereas native speakers speak very quickly. And there are tools that are coming that are doing that kind of processing, but it's, can we do it in real time? Can we do it with sufficient accuracy? Again, it probably doesn't matter in, sort of a simple audio translation if we get a word slightly wrong, because humans will understand what we mean. But if it is something important, if it is, well, I say important, but, if unit number 1 doesn't go where I want it to, or we can't infer the context of what I'm meaning, again, it's not just what I say, it's the context of what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's not just, do I know what Chris has said? Do I understand the concept? And I think there's also shifts in language. So if you've not seen it, I highly advise it. The Leeds Royal Armoury
Yes.
have been doing adverts where they've had one of the curators speaking in Gen Alpha. And it is amazing and wonderful to see somebody interacting. You go, that's just weird, but you're talking in a way that makes sense to the people you're speaking to, and adding the context of the Royal Armoury there. And yes, it's a very different problem, because it's not just what are you doing, what are you saying, but the context of it. And often they aren't, it doesn't always make sense, because when you're vocalizing something, you're not often speaking in full sentences and adding context. It's trains of thought that don't necessarily make sense, that wander all across. And it's just, how do you expect a computer to pull that all together in real time?
Do you think it's a training data type situation that if we could train the computer on enough examples, it would be able to tell? Or are there any other technological barriers that might also be getting in the way of that?
I think if we do have enough, well, we probably can get enough training data to do it. The question is, can we do it in real time?
Right, okay.
So again, if you look at large language models and similar, and the reasoning models that are being built on top of them, they're actually getting really quite good at interpreting what a human means and, what it should be saying in response to that. But having played around with them myself, it's not a real-time process. Often it sits there for, 10, 20, 30. I think the record I've managed to get was about 24 hours of making one go away and keep thinking.
Oh, wow, okay.
It just seemed to keep thinking. It's like, I will respond to you shortly. And 24 hours later, it never had. But doing it in 10, 20, 30 seconds isn't enough for games where you need that real-time response. It's not enough for a hospital or similar. So, and we move on very quickly. We don't have, again, most of the LLM systems we interact with are question, response, Whereas if I'm just talking out loud and expecting the computer to keep up with me, it's not only a real-time problem, it's also the context dynamically changes, what I'm talking about dynamically changes, and sometimes what was important 3 seconds ago no longer is. So if it starts giving me a response that's no longer appropriate, it's actually going to throw off my own flow state. So it's a human-computer interaction problem as well as a pure technology one.
Right, okay. So, yeah, there is a lot that's got to go into that. Goodness. So let's go back a little bit to this sort of jump you made going from sort of, the field of systems and technology into the field of games. How was that overall transition for you? Did you find that there were any challenges you weren't expecting, or were there things that you found easy, things that you found hard?
I think, again, this is my own personal experience. I generally found it quite easy moving across technology-wise, because one of the greatest things in programming and sort of on the hardware technological side is the skills that make a good programmer, make a good games programmer. Have you written good code that's understandable, that's optimal? Those are all wonderful things, but it's the fact you've then got to be able to do it at 60 frames per second. So you can write a great algorithm, but if it's too slow, it doesn't matter. So how do you manage the time budget? How do you manage things like audio, which are running at 44 kilohertz rather than 60 frames a second? So there's a huge number of different skills you need as a games developer that you didn't necessarily think about as sort of a software developer, because that real-time constraint makes things harder. And thankfully, my background involves lots of real-time systems, so I was prepared for that, but I think that does come as a shock for people. I think the other biggest thing is the fact there is such a huge focus on the human, because if a game isn't fun, it's not going to be played. And the definition of fun, obviously, is very variable. I love game. Well, I say I love 8 billion humans, Shenzhen IO. I sit and program for fun.
Right, okay.
There's nothing quite as fun as Shenzhen IO when you're sitting reading a data sheet and then working out and playing assembly programming for fun.
I'm glad that you can make sense of it, because I sure can't.
But yeah, that's a real sort of change there, where suddenly you've got to bring the human into the loop at all stages. And also the testing is very different, because again, your testing is not focused just on, is it correct and have I built the right thing? It's also focused on, and does the person like it, which is such a subjective experience that it brings in things you wouldn't necessarily have expected. So again, when you're working with a piece of hardware, you don't particularly care if the hardware likes it. It can't give you an answer other than sort of letting loose the magic smoke if you do things wrong. But if you're putting a game in front of people, is the pacing right? Are they happy with the menus? So, one of my personal peeves is when you can't skip a cutscene, especially, the introductory cutscene when you've played the game before and you just want to sort of get into the game. And it's like, no, you will sit there for 5 minutes and watch a cutscene and you're going, I don't want to skip it. I've seen it 7 times.
Yep, I had this exact experience with Mortal Kombat 9. I got to the final boss and I could not beat the final boss. And there's this really long cutscene building into it. And if I got frustrated and wanted to turn it off and come back to it later on, I had to watch that cutscene again when I revisited it later on. And it was about 5 minutes every single time. Did no one think to put a skip button in this?
Yeah. So again, that was sort of one of my things when I was leaving university, was we had Metal Gear Solid 4, which I actually thought was a really fun game. I liked it.
It is. Can we please liberate it from the PS3? I want to play it again.
If you want, I can loan you a PS3.
I have a PS3, but it's a case of getting it set up to play one game.
Yeah. But you put the game disc in, first thing you had to do, download the game. And you're going, wait, downloading the game? Then you get started playing, and I think in the first hour of gameplay, there's about 40 minutes of cutscenes.
Right.
Which, again, from a user perspective, the first time I played it, it was great. But it's put me off playing the game back through again because I didn't want to sit through all those cutscenes.
Yeah, it's not a Hideo Kojima game if there aren't a million cutscenes.
But that's, again, one of the things that, is very different about games as an area that you've got to think about is in software, we've got the concept of user stories and similar, where, we look through who is the user, what are they doing and why are they doing it, and thus how they move through our software. But games are also about stories. And so we've got a user story of how they play the game, but also how they interact with the game. And, again, thinking of, I've got to entertain the player while we're going through things like, setting up controls and similar, which, have you ever played Titanfall 2?
I have.
Yeah. So I love the setup of that, where it does the introduction of, how do you like your mouse set up? Mouse or mouse inverted. And it does it as an in-game sequence, so it feels natural and controlled, rather than, do you want your mouse inverted? No. Well, I do not. Yeah. So it's about not only the user stories, but also the story of the user, which is really interesting and different.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the weirder things with games as well, is that you can put a bunch of different people in front of a console and get them all to play the same game, and they can all experience it very differently. like you said, there's a lot of cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid 4. And there is definitely people who have played the entire game and they have skipped every single cutscene, or at least the ones that it let them, who weren't really interested in the story. They just wanted to play the stealth game. And they're not wrong for wanting that. Even though, it hurts me to think people missed out on it. But people want what they want from a game experience. And we don't really know what that's going to be until they're sitting there playing it.
No. I think, again, that's one of the most interesting things we get is games like Skyrim, have seen, I'm trying to think how old Skyrim is, 2011 was it released?
That's correct.
So it's 15 years old. And when you think how many other 15-year-old games still have a following in the millions, graphic updates, additional quests and similar, people are getting what they want out of it and building what they need. And again, that's something we don't often see in sort of a more general software world. The games world allows people to mod their games. And again, you see games where people have literally spent hundreds, thousands of hours building what they wanted to a game. So, I'll happily admit I don't really play Minecraft. I don't really sort of get it. The voxel thing doesn't really do it for me as sort of a thing. But when you see some of the things people have created, such as I saw one recently where someone had recreated the whole of New York City.
Oh, I saw that.
And you're thinking, this is a game, but someone's turned it into a piece of art. And it's art you can walk around and explore. That's amazing. And then on the other side, you've got people that have built things like working processors inside it. So you can play Minecraft on a computer built inside Minecraft. And it's mind-blowing when you think, what people do for this. Because it's a passion project, it's art, you don't see that, you very rarely see someone building add-ons for Microsoft Word, to do things, and then you see the amount of effort people put into their favorite game, and you go, wow, we've really inspired someone to do something, or we've given them the tools to make what's inside their own sort of, hearts and minds.
Yeah, absolutely. I love mods for this particular reason because keep in mind, modding was sort of my entry into games as well. That was what really got me excited about it. And keep in mind, when I first modded a game, the first mod I ever made was me, 12 years old, giggling like an idiot because I'd taken one of the Imperial armor sets from Oblivion, I'd taken it into Photoshop, and I'd figured out how to tint it pink. So every time I was walking around the Imperial City and I saw like Hieronymus Lex walking around in pink armor, I would giggle like an idiot. I did upload that to Nexus Mods when I was a kid, and I don't know if it was ever taken down, so that might still be out there somewhere. But yeah, it was just a really fascinating experience that it's the same game that you can buy from a shop, but you can customize it to make it the game that you want to play.
I think that's that's also a nice on-ramp into the industry as a whole. So one of the stories I remember reading online was sort of one of the designers for Warcraft, Ghostcrawler, and he started off doing things like StarCraft mods and levels, and then I think Warcraft 3 mods and levels as well. And that's how he ended up in the job that he ended up in as sort of a WoW level designer, because he had taken the tools and built, things that people wanted to play. So you don't need access to, you don't need a dev kit. You don't need, a hugely powerful PC. There's a very low barrier to entry of, I want to build some mods to explore things. And that could be, simple tweaks to color that make you laugh. Or it could be, the rise of Dota.
Yeah.
So, for those of you that don't know, Dota started off as a mod to Warcraft 3. And then it spawned, Dota, League of Legends, and various other games.
It wasn't even a mod, was it? It was just a custom map.
Yeah, which, again, that kind of, we spawned an entire genre of games from what a couple of people wanted as a custom map.
Pretty much. So because we're sort of towards the end of this now, I'm running out of time, I just want to ask one final question, and that's, from your experiences, anyone else coming from a more traditional programming background who wants to get into games, what advice would you give them?
I think it's probably kind of cliche, but I think passion is the most interesting thing there. So if you've got a traditional technical background, you can pass the coding interview. You can demonstrate that you can code well. Games is a field where it's about people, it's about interacting with them. So there's a very strong, do you fit with the company? Are you actually a gamer? Can you understand what people want? And I think that passion really comes across. So every games developer I've ever spoken to, whether, they're 20 years old or, 65 or, whether they've retired, they all speak passionately about what they've done or what they're doing. So it doesn't matter if all you can demonstrate is, a piece of code that turns on and off some lights. I had a really good conversation with an ex-colleague once where he'd built a little Python program that interacted with the train over the network. And, obviously it had feedback signals on the actual train. And now he had a little dashboard on his PC that also showed the same lights. And he was really happy and passionate about this. And it was wonderful to see. And I've done job interviews, both as the person on the job interview side and as the interviewer. And I don't think I've ever not wanted to actually talk to someone that was passionate, irrespective of what their passion was, because you want to work with them. They have that interest, they have that desire to do things. Whereas if you've got somebody sat across from you going, what's your favourite game? And they go, I don't know. Well, make a decision. So passion and demonstrating that is the key thing I would say is to get into it. Is if you want to get into this kind of field, if you want to get into games, you have to be able to demonstrate that it's something you want to do. It's not just a job. It's something you talk about with interest. And I think one of the best ways to express that is to answer the question of what is your favourite game? So my last question, I suppose, as I open this up to Jennifer of,
oh goodness,
what is your favourite game?
Right. For me, my favourite game of everything I've ever played, I am going to say it is old school RuneScape, because it is a big sandbox world that you can really just choose your own adventure through. There's no right way to play it. There's no wrong way to play it. You can do whatever you want to do, and the game is more than happy to let you play in all kinds of crazy and fun ways. Every time you play, it feels like an adventure. It always feels like you're making progress. And it's something that I have been going back to over and over again since 2007 for a very good reason. How about yourself? What's your favourite game?
So I think that's a very hard one. There are so many good games I've played, but for me, I think it's XCOM, the original, so XCOM UFO Defense, because there are so many stories that have come out of it. The number of times I've started and played the game, and I cheat, I'm a save scummer, I'm afraid.
Oh no.
I don't want any of my troops to die. I want to get through and tell this story of a heroic small team defending Earth against the alien invasion. But when you hear other people talk about their ones, and it's, and then this character that I've had for, a year in the game time died horribly because he stepped outside and got shot. When you hear the passion people talk about with their squads, with their defenses, with their designs, it really it was just such a great way to tell your own stories, and, it built a mythos around your own characters, and at the same time sort of gave you that anything that can happen will happen. And, sometimes it was great. I mean, I had the greatest, well, I say the greatest, but, it was a fun level where one of my characters missed a shot.
Okay.
And this was a time when, it traced the bullet itself. So I missed entirely. It went off, it hit a sector tank, that exploded, a floater tank. It exploded. That took out a gas station, which killed 2 other tanks, which killed everything in the area. And it was like, you have successfully won the mission and killed all the civilians.
Oh no.
And you're going, no, no. So you played the game horrifically carefully, and then it's like, bad luck.
One bad dice roll and now you're in The Hague.
Yeah. I felt really bad that day, but at the same time, there are so many good moments where, I saved civilians, and that was wonderful. And yeah, this is the point is you find passion in games. I love your answer because you started off slightly, just what's my favorite game. Then you saw that smile slowly go across your face as you started talking about things, and that's the passion that really makes people want to talk to you and want to work with you and go, "This is cool." Because yeah, it's amazing to see.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for everything today, Chris. It's been absolutely fascinating to get to chat with you.
No, thank you very much for having me, Jennifer.
And thank you very much.
And that was Developer Mode.